Previously, we followed the trail of a forgotten descendant, a man who inherited far more than a cabin hidden in the pines of Breckenridge. He uncovered old journals, diagrams, bones beneath the floorboards, and something else, something that watched him from the shadows of a pact sealed in desperation, stitched with blood. In this volume, we go deeper, not just into Breckenridge's buried truths, but into the rituals that still bind the town to its origins. Because here, newcomers are never just visitors, they're offerings. Long before tourists walked its snowy streets and ski chalets lit the hillsides, Breckenridge was a town of silence. It wasn't just the snow that muffled the sound, nor the altitude that thinned the air. Something deeper blanketed the place, an unspoken agreement, passed like an heirloom through bloodlines and backrooms, a compact carved not into stone or wood, but into the flesh of those who remained. And those who tried to leave, they were always watched. We begin this chapter with a conversation, fictionalized, but pieced together from fragments of local accounts, oral tradition, and archived interviews. A man named Ellis Granger, a recluse, former Summit County archivist, and fourth-generation resident of Breckenridge. He never appeared on camera. He refused to allow photographs. But over a series of late-night interviews, he agreed to speak. His voice trembled as he told the story, but his words never faltered. "You think this is about ghosts?" he asked. "You think it's about a haunted cabin or some cursed family tree? It's bigger than that. Breckenridge didn't survive because of mining or tourism. It endured because of the bound." We asked him what that meant. The bound. He paused, then spoke. "It's not just a name. It's a rite, a rule, a tethering. The pact wasn't only for the families that signed it during that collapse in 1874. It had to grow, to be fed, and it couldn't survive if outsiders came and went freely. Number every decade or so, when the pact grows thin, the bound begins again." Granger claimed that, for generations, newcomers to Breckenridge were watched. Not all, only a few. Those who stayed too long, who asked the wrong questions, who heard the wrong sounds in the woods. "When someone crosses into the line of interest," he said, "the town responds. Quietly, politely. You might be invited to a dinner. You'll be given a special brew, nothing sinister, just enough to open your head, to let it in." The "it" was never named. He said the ritual takes place at the edge of town, near a mine long since closed to the public. There, within a structure built atop an older foundation, the initiation is carried out. No chanting, no robes, just a circle of figures, a few drops of blood, and a whisper passed mouth to mouth. "You are of the bound. You will forget you were ever a part." Granger spoke of surveillance, of watchers who didn't carry badges or wear uniforms, locals who worked at the post office, at the chairlift, even the old woman who sold hot cider near the library, steps, all part of the old network. "It's not like in movies," he said. "No boogeymen, no monsters with teeth. The scariest thing is how polite they are, how welcoming. They smile as they take your freedom." We asked him, "What happens if someone tries to leave?" Granger's tone dropped. "They don't stop you. Not right away. You pack your bags, you gas up the car, you might even make it to the highway. But something always goes wrong. A rock slide, a blizzard. Sometimes your brakes fail, or you hit a deer that leaves no blood, or you get as far as Denver and then a phone rings in your hotel room, even if you didn't give out the number, and the voice says, 'You forgot something. Come back.'" We later tried to confirm Granger's employment at the Summit County Historical Records Office. There was no listing under his name, no address on file, and the building he claimed to live in burned down in 2007. But he knew things no one else could explain. He described the sealed birth registries, how every few years a child born to an outsider would be reclassified under a founding family name. He described the ritual bindings, scar-like marks near the wrists, said to throb during snowstorms. He described a code etched into certain cabin beams, symbols resembling veins, connecting the town like a circulatory map. And then he said something we weren't prepared for. The pact isn't about surviving winter. It's about binding memory, ensuring no one can pull back the curtain. Every generation, a few cracks appear. Someone sees too much. Someone starts asking, and when that happens, the bounder called. Granger vanished 2 weeks after our last recording. The tape recorder we used, left on his porch in the hope he'd return, was found days later, still warm. The last thing on the tape? Footsteps, a long breath, and one word: bind. As the investigation pressed on, we uncovered reports, official and otherwise, of disappearances stretching back decades. Each case followed a pattern. Visitors who stayed more than 3 weeks, locals who inherited land connected to the original founders, and each one gone without trace. But their names live on, in dusty books, in carved beams, and in the eyes of the townsfolk who never blink quite right when you ask about them. The town is bound, not just by blood, but by fear, ritual, and memory itself. And the question that haunts us now is this: has the pact grown so strong that even we are part of it now? In the next segment, we go deeper into the hidden layers beneath Breckenridge, forgotten tunnels, symbols beneath floorboards, a ranger who disappeared mid-transmission, and the theory that the pact isn't just a tradition, but a force older than the town itself. Subscribe to MindFuel now, where the ground beneath Breckenridge opens wide and something ancient begins to whisper from the dark. This isn't just a ghost town. This is a living memory, bound in blood, and still very much awake. By the time winter lifts its veil over the Colorado highlands, Breckenridge once again appears as it always does, pristine, picturesque, and welcoming. But buried beneath the fresh powder and polished storefronts are names, dozens of names, etched into yellowing case files, emergency call transcripts, and desperate missing posters pinned to ranger stations that no longer get staffed after nightfall. The disappearances began long before anyone was willing to connect them. Spread across decades, scattered across seasons. A young couple from Nebraska in 1981, a solo backpacker in 1997, a family of 3 in 2010. None related, no common cause, but always the same region. A radius of about 4 miles, forest hugging the back of Mount Baldy, descending toward a trail system long since closed to public use. And at the center of this area is a trailhead, unmarked now. Known to some as Widow's Path, a local nickname, a relic from a time when they didn't sugarcoat what they knew. What makes these disappearances so unsettling isn't just their frequency, it's the convergence. Timelines that overlap. Multiple cases that unfold on the same day, in the same hour, sometimes with groups of hikers setting off from opposite ends of the forest and never returning, like the woods simply took them. But of all the files in the Breckenridge Search and Rescue Archives, one cluster remains the most disturbing. The year was 2016. Between June 2nd and June 9th, 4 hikers disappeared, each from different states, each hiking alone. The 4th, a man named Grant Whitaker, was found 6 days later, wandering barefoot, shivering, and silent on the edge of French Gulch Road. He was missing his coat. His pack was nowhere to be found. But most horrifying, he was also missing both eyes. They hadn't been violently removed, no lacerations, no bruising. Medical reports described it as a clean absence, as if something had simply unmade them. When questioned, Whitaker didn't scream. He didn't cry. He simply sat, shaking his head, mouthing something unintelligible again and again. After weeks of rehabilitation and sedation, a nurse at the facility, off the record, claimed she'd begun to recognize the phrase. Not English, not even language, really. Just breathe in rhythm. But one sound in the pattern stood out. Fuel. The nurse dismissed it until a younger orderly, local to Summit County, grew pale and quiet when he overheard. That's what we were told when we were kids, he said. If you hear your mother's voice in the woods, but she's not with you, don't follow. You're being called. You're fuel. Other hikers who've made it out, those lucky enough, have described a phenomenon now whispered between search and rescue workers and dismissed in official documentation. They don't call it hallucination. They call it echo whispers. According to reports, hikers on certain trails near the closed mines have described hearing voices that perfectly mimic people they love. A brother, a grandfather, a childhood friend. The voices are never threatening, never raised. They don't scream or call out for help. They simply speak. Turn around, Lily. You dropped something. Come over here, Theo. I want to show you something. It's okay, Sam. I'm here, just past the trees. And nearly every time a hiker has followed one of these voices, their path abruptly ends. GPS trackers glitch. Cell reception vanishes. Their footprints disappear even in soft soil. It's as if the earth itself resets behind them. One experienced mountaineer, a man named Richard Kestner, interviewed anonymously, described the sensation after hearing his late father's voice near a ridge south of Boreas Pass. It wasn't memory, he said. It wasn't like a dream or imagination. It was him. I heard the exact cough he always had after his pipe. I heard the laugh he gave when I fell off my bike. I felt it down to my bones. But I also knew, somewhere deep inside, that if I took one more step toward that sound, I would never be Richard Kowesner again. He never returned to Breckenridge. He moved states. But he claims even now on cold nights, that same voice calls to him from just outside the tree line behind his house. And sometimes he swears. There are footprints. In the past 15 years alone, over 38 individuals have gone missing within this radius. While most are eventually ruled lost to the elements or presumed dead due to injury, those who've seen the compiled maps notice the alarming convergence around 3 old sites: Widow's Path, Hollow Creek, and the old Caro mine shaft, which no longer appears on public USGS topo maps. It's said these 3 places form a triangle, a shape referenced again and again in old journals recovered from the McCree cabin, the same one inherited by Michael Grady, the man whose story we shared in segment 4. In one journal entry, dated 1923, a man wrote, "The whispers begin near the roots. They come when the wind is still. They come when you think you're alone, and they always sound like home." So what are the whispers? Where do they come from? Are they psychological phenomena, acoustic mirages, echoes trapped in natural corridors of granite and snow? Or are they something older than Breckenridge itself, tied to the pact, the rituals, the bloodlines, and more terrifying still, do they feed on memory, on trust, on love? Because the cruelest part is this: when the whispers call, they do not scream. They invite. And the moment you recognize the voice as someone you loved, you've already taken the first step into forgetting yourself. In the next segment, we examine a discovery so disturbing it was sealed from public release. A tunnel, previously unknown, unearthed by utility workers beneath Breckenridge's historic district. What they found inside confirms what local legend has whispered for over a century. There is something buried beneath this town, something that never sleeps. Subscribe to MindFuel now, because what's coming next will force you to question everything we think we know about folklore, rituals, and the terrifying permanence of the pact. Coming up, an underground structure, a carved message no one can translate, and a map made of bone. This isn't over. This is just the next descent. Just beyond South Ridge Street, tucked between the craft coffee shops and art galleries, there stands a small, whitewashed church, quaint, unassuming. Most tourists walk past it without a second glance, too distracted by the ski shuttle or the scent of cider warming in nearby taverns. But the locals? They glance twice, not at the structure itself, but at the ground beneath it. Because the church, St. Eustace of the Hollow, wasn't always a church. Before the steeple and painted glass windows, before the Sunday potlucks and summer weddings, the building was something else entirely. A meeting hall, a sanctuary, and, if legend is to be believed, a crypt. The story of the crypt has always existed in the margins of Breckenridge's history. It's never been published, never formally acknowledged. But if you ask anyone over the age of 70 who grew up within these mountains, you'll get the same quiet nod, the same low answer. Yes, under the floorboards. But we don't go down there. Not anymore. The legend goes back to the final winter of 1884. The founding families, 5 in total, had weathered 6 years of mine collapses, gold fraud, disease, and famine. They had buried their own, their rivals, and some say their regrets. But it wasn't until that brutal final winter, when the snow came in early October and did not relent until April, that the pact was formalized in blood. We covered the collapse in segment 3. We followed the starvation, the ritual. But what was never told until now was what they did after. They needed a place to keep the remains, not just bones, but something more sacred, more essential. So they built it, by hand, with pickaxes and prayer. And beneath what is now St. Eustace of the Hollow, they laid a chamber of stone and soil, a chamber lined with mirrors, adorned with old mining insignias and family crests carved in iron, each corner marked by a symbol that has defied interpretation to this day. They called it the Heart of the Hollow. And according to legend, one of the founders didn't die in the mine collapse. He was changed. Fast forward to 2020. A descendant of the Withrow family, one of the 5 original bloodlines, returned to Breckenridge after the death of her grandmother. Her name was Lena Withrow, a postgraduate student in folklore and early American mysticism. She wasn't like the others in her family. She believed in documents, in cross-referencing, in evidence. Until she found a letter, postmarked 1987, buried in a false wall of her grandmother's attic. It was addressed to her mother, but never sent. In it, her grandmother detailed a warning. The door in the church was never supposed to be opened, but I heard it. The heartbeat. I still hear it. Lena thought it was metaphor, a poetic fear, until she came across floor plans of the church, originals, stamped and dated. And in the original sketch, a version never submitted to Summit County for zoning, was a stairwell that no longer existed. A spiral staircase leading down into a space beneath the altar, labeled only with one word, cradle. That word would haunt her. In November 2020, under the guise of conducting a restoration assessment, Lena obtained permission from the church's board to examine its substructure. She used ground-penetrating radar borrowed from her university lab. The results were conclusive. A void, approximately 17 feet below the surface, roughly 12 by 20 feet. Lined in what the scan suggested was reinforced stone or possibly leaded iron. There should have been no such chamber. There was no record of it in city files. But it was there. So she returned, alone, at night. In her private journal, later discovered by her cousin and handed to a local historian under condition of anonymity, Lena detailed the descent. There was a trapdoor, she wrote, hidden behind the altar's baseboard, secured by old nails. Inside, the stairwell was intact, narrow, barely passable, choked with stale air and coated in frost, despite the warmth above. At the bottom, she found the chamber, just as the letter described. Mirrors on all four walls, but cracked in strange patterns, like something had fractured through from the other side. The air was warm, heavy, despite the lack of any heat source, and in the center of the room, a box, roughly the size of a coffin, but not made of wood, stone, unbroken, sealed in wax, inscribed with a single sentence. 5 bound, but 1 held fast. And beside it, against the far wall, was a mound of cloth, what Lena first mistook as forgotten burial rags, until she stepped closer and saw the breath, the fabric, was rising, falling, as if something underneath still drew air. She reached out, compelled by something she couldn't explain, and pressed her palm to the cloth, and that's when she felt it. A heartbeat, slow, inhumanly slow, like the rhythm of stone cooling after 1,000 years. But there, alive. In her final journal entry, Lena wrote, "It's waiting. It's not dead. It never was. The pact didn't seal them all away. One stayed to anchor it, and I think it knows me. It felt me." She returned to the staircase, but the air had changed. She wrote of hearing voices, not loud, not angry, singing, a lullaby in a language she couldn't recognize, but felt as though it had once been sung to her, in her blood. She made it back to the trapdoor, nailed it shut behind her. Left town the next day. She hasn't been seen since. Whether Lena Withrow lives or not is unknown. Her apartment in Boulder was abandoned, her belongings untouched. Her phone last pinged in the mountains, just outside Breckenridge. And yet, every spring, the caretakers of St. Eustace of the Hollow report the same phenomenon: fresh frost on the floor near the altar, and once, on Easter Sunday, a soft thudding, too slow to be human, beneath the sanctuary floorboards. The congregation said it was an old pipe. The priest, he refused to hold service there again. In our next segment, we examine what may be the most disturbing part of this legend: the living descendants of the founding families and how each one seems bound to Breckenridge in ways they cannot explain, escape, or sever. Why can't they leave? Why do their bloodlines show identical birthmarks? And what happens when one tries to break the pact? Subscribe to MindFuel now, because we are about to step into the present, where the consequences of ancient promises no longer stay buried. Coming up, inheritance, identity, and what it means to be chosen by something that remembers the snow of 1884. This isn't folklore. This is family. And for some, it's already too late. There are towns in America with secrets so old, so deeply rooted, they begin to resemble tradition. Breckenridge is one of them. And traditions, no matter how strange, how cruel, or how soaked in history, have a way of surviving, not by accident, but by design. The pact never ended. It simply changed form. Meet Elliot Ramsey, age 29, a Denver native, amateur genealogist, and most notably, a direct descendant of Harold T. Bracken, one of the 5 original men rumored to have drafted and sealed the pact in the winter of 1884. Elliot never knew his ancestry. His father had walked out before he was born. His mother never spoke of family. It wasn't until a spontaneous DNA test, one of those mail-in kits, returned results flagged with multiple anomalies, that the first cracks formed. Unusual matches. Genetic markers flagged in 5 separate Colorado databases, all tied to families within a 50-mile radius of Breckenridge. That's when the letters started arriving. Unmarked, cream-colored parchment, wax seals in the shape of a tree root. No return address, no postmark. Just a sentence. The root remembers the branch. Come home. At first, Elliot thought it was a scam, a prank. But the second letter, arriving just 3 days later, contained a photograph. A black and white image of 5 men standing shoulder to shoulder in front of a log building. Early 1900s, judging by the attire. The man on the far left was identical to Elliot. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. But it was what was written on the back of the photo that unsettled him. Harold T. Bracken, 5th of 5. Still waiting. Still waiting for what? Elliot returned to Breckenridge that fall. He claimed it was research, a short documentary project. But those close to him noted a change, a sense of purpose that hadn't existed before. He kept to himself, walked the trails outside of town after dark, visited the archives, the graveyards. Then he vanished. For 3 weeks, there was no word. His phone disconnected, apartment abandoned, his bank account emptied, and then he reappeared at a winter solstice festival just outside Breckenridge. But he was no longer an observer. He stood at the center of a strange gathering in the woods, surrounded by figures in dark robes, faces obscured. They stood around a gnarled stump, a massive half-dead tree with roots that spidered across the ground like veins. In a recovered audio clip from a nearby wildlife photographer, recorded by chance, Elliot's voice can be heard. Clear, calm, reciting something that chilled even seasoned analysts. From blood we bind, and to root we return. Let the moon witness, and the soil receive. I am branch, I am breath, I am sacrifice. Pause. Narrator's voice slows, measured. What Elliot had joined was not a cult, not in the traditional sense. It was a legacy, a secret society tied to the 5 founding families of Breckenridge, each descendant inducted under the same conditions, each given the same warnings. The pact is real. The bloodline must be kept. The price must be paid. Through documents smuggled out by a defector, a former member named D, we now know more than ever about what the pact demands. It grants longevity. Members of the circle, known internally as the rooted, age slowly, recover from injury with uncanny speed, have memories that stretch beyond ordinary lifespans. Some believe the founding 5 still exist, reincarnated or simply preserved, passing down knowledge, guiding the pact through whispered rites. But the cost? The cost is $500, and more importantly, memory. Every blood moon, those chosen by lineage must feed the root. Not metaphorically, but literally. The ritual requires a sacrifice, not always fatal, but always permanent. Sometimes it's a tooth, a finger, a family heirloom soaked in blood, a memory willingly offered and never recovered, and on rare occasions, a life taken from someone unbound, a traveler, a hiker, a soul the root will not miss, but the root never forgets. In Elliot's case, it began with dreams. He wrote in his private journal, later recovered and leaked to a fringe journalist site, of standing in water up to his neck, unable to breathe, but never drowning. Always watching, hearing voices call him by names he'd never heard before. He wrote of a face in the mirror, older than his own, smiling. He described memories that didn't belong to him, children speaking German in an 1890s schoolhouse, a fire in the woods where a man in a blood-stained apron said prayers to the earth, the warmth of holding someone's severed hand, and the joy that followed. These weren't hallucinations, they were gifts, echoes of the others, of the founders. And then came the pull, the desire to return, again and again, to the stump, to the woods, to the root. Even as Elliot fled the town twice, he found himself back within days. Once, with no memory of how he got there. The second time, barefoot, clothes torn, lips purple with cold, but smiling, always smiling. Those who join the pact do not serve it. They become it, bound by blood, by memory, by debt. They are extensions of the founders. Each life added to the root makes it stronger. The founders don't need to live in bodies anymore. They live in the line. And as long as the descendants feed the pact, the founders remember everything, even what they've buried, even the truths the town no longer dares speak aloud, even the sound of someone screaming in the trees a mile past the last marked trail during the red haze of a blood moon night. This is not legend. This is happening now. We have names, dates, maps, and we are only just beginning to uncover how many still participate, how many are watched, how many are waiting for the next moon. Coming up in our next segment, the Harvest Moon Mass, a ceremony few outsiders have ever seen, where the line between tradition and terror becomes impossible to define. Rituals hidden in plain sight, live streams cut before the final chant, and the child who returned from the woods, speaking in a dead language, calling herself Fifth Root. Subscribe to MindFuel now, because once you hear what happens when the harvest begins, you'll understand why some stories were never meant to survive. And yet, they do, because the pact lives on, and it remembers you. Next up, a forgotten ritual, a vanished congregation, and a truth that turns the blood colder than any Colorado winter, only on MindFuel. The ceremony was complete. The blood moon stared down from above like an unblinking eye, and beneath the church floor, the earth pulsed once more. He had crossed the threshold, not by force, but by blood. His blood, their blood, one and the same. But the pact is not just ancient, it's hungry, and hunger never sleeps. In Volume 3, the cost of joining becomes clear, and not everyone stays dead.